All right, Shabbat Shalom, ladies and gentlemen. And right before we get things started here with lighting the Shabbat candles, I just want to share a little bit of thought here. I call it Seize the Moment. And it's a reflective thought here on this week's Parsha Ve'echanan. Something interesting that we see, which I wanted to bring to your attention, which most people, they don't really pay attention to probably when they take a look at this. It's one of the things I explained before is that the first 11 chapters or so in Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, Moshe is imparting Musar to the people. And Musar doesn't really have an English translation. We translate it as ethics. But he's given them critical advice, and also by recalling the past journeys of the former generation. And it's interesting, he's continuing here in this parsha of Ve'echanan, retelling the story. In fact, when he begins the very beginning of Ve'echanan, Echanan Chinun, which means a gift, it's actually, we also use it in the root to supplicate, to beg for prayer, where Moshe said, Ve'echanan el Adonai be'et hahi, more is at that very time that I begin to beg God to enter the land, which God then tells him, Rav lach, enough, you're not going to enter into the land. So I want to point something out that's fascinating, is that when you get to chapter 4, verse 41, the Torah tells us that at this specific time of the journey's reiteration, it tells us over here in Pasuk Mem Aleph 41, Az Yabdil Moshe Shalosh Arim, that Moses sets aside 3 cities over on the bank of the Jordan River on the east side. And we know that's what we call the Arei Miklot, the cities of refuge where a Rotseach, an inadvertent killer, has to flee. We learned about this at the end of Parashat Maaseh, which concludes the book of Numbers. And so it just briefly mentions between verse 41 of chapter 4 to verse 43 about Moshe setting aside the Arei Miklot. But something doesn't make sense here. Because right after this, we get down to verse 44, and the Torah tells us over in verse 44, it says, V'zot ha-Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei b'nei Israel. This is the Torah that Moshe placed before the children of Israel. El eli ha'edut v'ha'chukim v'ha'mishpatim asher diber Moshe el b'nei Israel. B'tzeitam mi'Mitzrayim. This is also the decrees, this is the judgments, this is the ordinances that Moshe had spoke to the children of Israel as they departed from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, on the opposite side of the Jordan, over in the valley of Beth Peor, in the land of Sichon, basically over there in the Moab territory. And then it begins chapter 5. Follow me with this here. Verse 40, going back to verse 25 of chapter 4 here, is quite interesting because we just read this on Sunday for Tisha B'Av. It's usually the tradition of many communities, while they observe Tisha B'Av, that before you read Sefer Echad, the Book of Lamentations, there's a segment of the Torah that you read from, which is in Deuteronomy 4, 25 through 40, where Moses tells the people, Ki toli banim uvnei vanim, that when you have children and grandchildren, and when they enter to the land, meaning into the land of Israel, they're going to go astray from God. They're going to create idols, and then God is going to come against them. Moshe says that heaven and earth will testify the validity of the Torah, and the people will be taken to exile. You get to verse 29, that in that very location of exile, uvik shaktem misham, that from right there, et Adonai Elohecha, when you seek Hashem your God, with all your heart you will find him. Jeremiah reiterates this, actually quotes it in his book, right up to the destruction of the first temple, about the people seeking Hashem. And so ultimately, once the people do a shuvah, they come back to Hashem, and they realize that God, is the only one. The Torah later says over verse 35 in chapter 4, Ata harei eta lada'at ki Adonai hu ha'Elohim, that you need to understand, you need to know that Hashem, he is God, ain't Om Milvado, and there is none other. And so once the Torah comes to a conclusion of this exile, it then tells us in verse 41 through 43, Moshe sets aside these Arei Miklot. And then verse 44 to 49, the remaining part of chapter 4, just tells us that this is the Torah that Moshe taught on the east end of the Jordan. By the time you get to chapter 5, we then get into what we call the Luchot Shniot, the second set of tablets that Moses brought down after the people sinned with the golden calf, back in Parsha Kitasa. And so we read that there, and the obvious question is, why is the Arei Miklot being mentioned? These questions have very good relevance, and here's the reason why. Even though the Torah speaks about the establishment of what would be 3 of the Arei Miklot, east of the Jordan, in the territory of Ruvain, of Gad, and half of Manasseh, the actual Arei Miklot were not valid until the Jews entered Eretz Israel under the leadership of Joshua. And then in there's also 5 other Arei Miklot that have to be established. So it's a total of 7. The Torah later talks about this later in Deuteronomy. Those 7 cities of refuge that an inadvertent killer flees to are regarding the territory of the 7 Canaanite nations that God promised Abraham his descendants would conquer way back in Parsha Lech Lecha. So the question here is, why does the Torah have Moses reiterating the journey and giving Musar a rebuke to the people and trying to impart chizuk, spiritual strength to them, and chinuch, and education to them? And then out of nowhere it says, oh yeah, when you go to the land, you'll be exiled and you'll come back. And then it just stops in the middle before the reading of the second set of tablets to tell us about these cities of refuge, which doesn't make any sense because Moshe, you're not going to be there to establish the validity of these cities of refuge because you're going to be dead already. You die at the end. So what is going on here? This is very, very fascinating. I'd like to make a quote here from the Chazal, the sages break down in Masechet Makot. They said, whatever I have the power to do, I will do. A mitzvah that is possible to fulfill, I will fulfill. Very, very interesting quote. Coming behind this quote, I'd like to refer to another quote, actually brought down by Avot de Rabbi Natan. Avot de Rabbi Natan is kind of a commentary to Pirkei Avot, which some people call Ethics of the Fathers, but literally Pirkei means chapters, so chapters of the Fathers, which is, great material people learned during the Omer period about Musar. And over in Avot the Rabbi Natan, the statement says, do not distance yourself from a midah. This midah means attributes. It defines characteristic trait. But here it's being used as an idiomatic expression for mitzvah. So don't distance yourself from a mitzvah that does not have a limit, or from a job that does not have an end. Very interesting quotation between Avot Rabbi Natan and also Masechet Machot. What does it all mean? And why am I quoting it into relation to, it's saying Moses sets aside here, Az Yavdil Moshe Shalosh Arim, these 3 cities on the eastern and the Jordan, even though they're not relevant yet or not valid until the Jews get to Eretz HaKodesh. So what is going on here? Well, let's understand first the quotation here from Avot Rabbi Natan, regarding the fact not to distance oneself from a mitzvah that does not have a limit, or from a job that does not have an end. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination that dwells within each and every one of us, that tries to bombard us and distract us every single day for fulfilling our purpose in this world, tries to swindle us or discourage us, to sow thoughts of doubt or low self-esteem on trying to make spiritual progress. And so basically, if we fail, we stumble, we think less of ourselves. We get convicted, we go into self-condemnation. This is very important because let's consider what Moshe is doing here. He's reiterating. At this point in the Torah, when it says, at this time Moses separates these 3 cities, it's connected directly back the way the Malbim brings it down, which is fascinating, to the beginning of the parasha when Moshe is begging God, at that time, Moses says, I begin profusely begging Hashem. And of course, he gives these very poetic expressions to God by saying, Adonai Elohim Atah, Hachilota, that, you have begun to show your servant greatness. And, he's kissing up to Hashem, not in a very vain way. He's just acknowledging that you're the power of all powers. I would like to get into the land. I'd like to build the temple. And God says, Ravlach, it's enough. Don't ask me no more. You're not going to get into the land. Now, we know Moshe can't get into the land because of what happened back at the episode of the Mer Merva. Back in Parsha Huchat, the issues of the water, God told him to speak to the rock. He struck the rock. And most people perceive Moshe's actions as something negative or sinful. Really not. God permitted that still to happen because, for one, as I shared here before, the people were incompatible with Moshe. They were not the same madrega spiritually with him. And every time they failed to get on his level spiritually, there was always some type of balagan happening. There was plagues breaking out. There was all types of kvetching. The ground and the earth was opening up. You know, people were at a loss. They were not actually emulating the same faith that Moshe and Aharon had. God was trying to show the people the entire time that Moses and Aaron are not demigods. They are nothing but agents in the hand of Hashem. And therefore, God allowed Moshe to speak to the rock through free will. Instead of speaking to the rock, he struck the rock. And then Torah says, afterwards, Aharon ascends to Hor Hahar, and he dies right before the people. The Torah describes it so vividly, and the people understood that Moses and Aaron are nothing but pawns in the hands of God. And therefore, God is the power behind every single human personality. It doesn't matter how spiritually gifted they are, etc. So Moses is recalling, at that time, what is this time? Where we're sitting at the end of the Chumash Midbar, the book of Numbers, where we're now sitting on the eastern shores of Eretz Israel, across the Yarden, the Jordan River, and Moses is begging. And God says no. But we still see here that Moses has great vision. Even though he can't get in, it's not stopping him from trying his very best to make up for what God called him to be as a leader. So in other words, when the Yetzer Hara comes to you and me, and it causes us to stumble, and we slip up, and we think, I fell down, so let me mope, and let me just sit here and just wallow away in misery. Becomes psychologically damaging because of the force of the Yetzer Hara that says you can't amount to nothing, you're nothing, you repeat the same bad habits as your ancestors. In other words, you're not amounting to becoming the man or woman that Hashem has called you to be. And so, basically, your downfall is not getting you anywhere. Moses, you can't get in the land. What are you worried about these Ari Michlo for? By the way, the Ari Michlo had a very messianic theme to it as well. That's another subject. What Moshe is so gung-ho about these cities of refuge. Moses has messianic vision here, that even though he can't get in, the vision is not going to die. And so even though he can't get in, the Torah highlights that he has vision. He's still trying to gather these holy sparks before he dies. And this is powerful. Solomon says that the righteous may fall 7 times, but they still get back up. 7 times a righteous person may stumble and sin, but they still get back up. To come back to what the quotation here is in Avot, the Rabbinate, that says here that you shouldn't distance yourself from a mitzvah that does not have a limit, or from a job that does not have an end. What does that mean? How can you compare it to? What does that mean? What is Chazal saying? Don't distance yourself from a mitzvah that does not have a limit or a job that doesn't have an end. Very powerful. The quotation in Avot, the Rabbi Natan, is actually found in another quote in Pirkei Avot. It's one of my favorite quotes. You may not be required to finish the job, but you're not exempt from doing your part. Let's understand this in a parable. Imagine one day you go to the beach of your choice, wherever they may be. And as you get to the actual coastline, you're there in your hand with a cooler, umbrella, whatever it is for enjoying a day at the beach. And you notice there's nobody at the beach, or there may be some other people at the beach. But then you notice something. Things are glistening from the sunlight as the breakers, the waves hit the shoreline. You notice all these exotic, rare gemstones are being flushed on shore. But, obviously because of the gravitational pull of the ocean's current, it may sweep it on shore, but it's going to bring it back out to sea. And you notice sapphires, rubies, emeralds, diamonds, and other exotic gems. And you say, wow, if I get these, I can get out of my financial debt. I can do many things of that nature. But what are you going to do? Here you are in your swimming suit. You have a cooler in your hand with your sandwich in it, and you don't have all the material to collect all the gems. What are you going to do? Leave it there? Especially if there's other beachgoers? Absolutely not. You're going to drop everything in your hand. You're going to try to run to the shoreline and gather as much as you can in your 2 hands. And your God-given strength, you're going to try to go and gather everything as best as possible. How long is it going to take? Who knows? You'll dump that cooler out. Maybe it's a little 2x2 cooler. And you'll try to schlep all the gems you could in there to bring it back. Who knows the actual estimate, the value in this thing? You're not going to sit there and say, well, geez, I don't have like an excavation team here. I don't have, treasure chests. So what's the point? You realize, I'm not sure, is this going to happen all day? I'm going to hurry up and delve into here so I can get all of the gemstones. That's very fascinating because Solomon actually brings down in Proverbs chapter 2, verse 4. He says that when it comes to the things of Hashem, the Shekhinah, that if you seek Chachma, Shekhinah, if you seek it like kesef, like money, and like other choice treasures, then you will acquire it. You will acquire it. In other words, what we understand here from Pirkei Avot, the Rabbinate, is not to distance ourselves from a mitzvah, okay, and a job that's left undone. Our job is not finished until we give up our last breath inside this world. And therefore, in order to gain spiritual acquisition that will benefit us for all eternity, we have to pursue them with the same fervor or energy that we would in a physical pursuit of money. So if we saw money coming up on the seashore, very rare gemstones, we would immediately jump in and take it. Why? Because we know this can help establish us for life. If we're in a spiritual deficit, compare the analogy here to have someone spiritually downfalling in sin. They feel like they get set back light years behind. I explained before at the beginning of last week's parasha of Deuteronomy, Moshe reiterates the journey. It was supposed to be an 11-day journey from Chorev to the shores of Israel. 11-day journey becomes 40 years. Why is that? Because sin creates space and therefore distance a person from their actual tachlit, their purpose in this world. However, Shuva, done properly, a person can rectify that space they created and go back and rectify the damages and shorten their distance. It doesn't matter if they're 70, 80 years old. It's possible. Abraham, you think he fulfilled his purpose? We read about this guy. He's an altar kacher. He leaves home at the age 75. He gets a child by 100. He gets a bris by 100. Sarah and Menus, she's a 90-year-old woman. These are not young kids. Okay, but nonetheless, Abraham took almost a whole entire lifespan to begin to draw close to Hashem. We read about his life story in the Midrash about always having this knowledge of the one true living God. His father made idols for Nimrod, worshiped the constellation. They were advanced in astronomy and astrology. But it wasn't until he became older that he started to tap in and realize, I'm 75 years old. What's left for me? A retirement home? You know, what am I going to do? I'm going to have a discount card for senior citizens? Abraham said, no, I'm not throwing in the proverbial towel yet. I can't distance myself from a mitzvah. This job is not undone. And while I still have the breath of Hashem in me, I'm still going to inquire as much as I can. The Torah tells us him and Sarah made souls. And because of that zerizut, that alacrity, that he then had a Yitzhak, and the Yitzhak then had a Yaakov. And we see from that, the kishkish from the loins of Abraham comes forth Klal Israel. And so we see Moses, you may not get into the land. Moses lives to 120. But Moses still had messianic vision. He was still imparting the Torah. That's why these cities of refuge are so instrumental. The Ramchal talks about this a lot more in detail, about them being a very messianic consciousness to a degree. And the Torah says, once again, in 441, Az Yabdil Moshe Shalosh Arim. It said that Moses sets these cities aside. Why? Because immediately after that, the Torah then tells us after, V'zot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lefnei bnei Israel eli ha'edu v'ha'chokomim v'ha'mishpatim asher diber Moshe el bnei Israel b'tzeitam miMitzrayim. This is the Torah that Moses instructed to the Jewish people. These are the chukim. These are the decrees. These are the instructions that he spoke to the Jewish people. Why? B'tzeitam miMitzrayim. Why? Because somebody always has to come out of Egypt. Every day someone's coming out of Metzar, out of restriction. And if you think that because you have a downfall, there's no point in me trying to actually strengthen myself, to try to actually gather these holy sparks of what I'm here for, you're letting the Yetzer Hara keep you in Mitzrayim. Moshe may not make it into the land, but Moshe still extends all the way to this day when we lift the Torah scroll up and we say, V'zo HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Israel al pi Adonai biyad Moshe. This is the Torah given to the children of Israel, the command of Hashem, through the hand of Moses. Hand, Yad Chazaka, a strong hand, spiritual strength, Moshe. was 120, but the Torah describes him as being like a young man in his 20s, full of chaya, full of life. And so, friends, the Torah's challenge to us is that we may have downfalls. We may have downfalls, but as long as we have a power, strength to fulfill a mitzvah, to fulfill our purpose, we can't squander our days in self-condemnation. We can't let the Yetzer Hara lie to us and make lame excuses on why we're not going ahead in the world. You cannot sit here and collect a check to check, paycheck to paycheck, like the Gentiles do. Live today, die tomorrow, the circle of life. Eat, marry, and be happy. That's not what God brought us into this world for. Hashem brought us into this world for a purpose to fulfill. And so what we have to have here is that vision. We have to keep going forward. Okay, you fall, you downfall. It's not the end of the world. You do shuvah. That's why we have to shuvah. Shuvah is to impart to us. Sometimes a person said, well, Rabbi, you don't understand. I've done the same sin 99 times. 99.9 times I've done it. Okay? So what? Maybe the 100th time you do it will be the straw that breaks the camel's back so you don't sin no more. Every one of us is different. I'm not saying you have a license free to sin, but what I'm saying, you sin because there's a defectiveness that you have to deal with, and Hashem tries to show us how to deal with that defect. Okay, we're all holy sinners to a degree, and therefore Hashem made us imperfect, and He's trying to draw our attention to Him. So we have to have vision. As long as we have a task in this world, the job is not done. Your job is not done. My job is not done, and we have to consider that in a situation, like let's say if someone was in financial distress, great debt, they owe thousands of dollars, and they had an opportunity where they saw gemstones coming on the seashore, they would hurry up and rush and get it. Or they would run here or they would run there to get all the money. Likewise, you have to take a look at all the spiritual gemstones that are floating on the seashores of life. And you may not be equipped because you say, well, you don't understand, spiritually I had a defect here, spiritually I had a defect there, and therefore I'm not equipped. I kind of had a downfall, I'm not equipped. So what? You take what you have and use it with your two hands, the strength that God has given you. Solomon says in Ecclesiastes, do whatever you can while you still have strength. Because sadly, the reality is where we're all going, we can't do that no more. You cannot make up for missing mitzvot. You can't make up for those things. You do it while you have strength now. And if you had a downfall, as Solomon says, the righteous fall 7 times and get back up. Okay, so you have shuvah, you do a shuvah, you get back up. You confess to Hashem your wrongdoings. You ask Hashem for strength, and you go on. And even though you may not be spiritually equipped, as you continue to throw your strength and continue to put your trust in Hashem, He'll give you the chizuk, He'll give you the strength to overcome. And that's the most important part of the journey. Once again, Moshe is telling the journey. Most people are so focused about the destination. Oh, when I die, brother, and I get to heaven. Or when Olam Haba comes, who cares about all that? If we're not equipping ourselves on the journey is what it's about. It's all about the journey. Okay? And most people, they're kvetching on the journey. They don't appreciate what Hashem is doing for them on the journey. That's where they get caught up in the Yetzer Hara. They get distracted in the journey. They're climbing up that mountain, trying to make an aliyah, and maybe they had a downfall. They plummeted. And so therefore, they're like, what's the point of going up? I'll take my time. I had a downfall. Oh, welcome to the club. Nobody here is a super Sadiq in a great way. Solomon says, it's not a righteous person in the world who has not committed an avera, transgression. So we're all in the same boat together. But nonetheless, we have to have the same alacrity. We have to have the same zerazut. We have to have that same alertness to do whatever Hashem has given us. And once again, we have the power of strength within us. We have to run into it. And as we seek the things of Hashem, like we would for spiritual acquisition, we will acquire those things and gain God's favor. So Chavarim, I want to thank you for joining with me. I'm going to run now. We got to go light candles here. And if you watch us live, we'll see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. B'ezras Hashem. So may the God of Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov bless you and your families. Shabbat Shalom. Okay.